This is the E-commerce Edge podcast with your host, Jason Greenwood. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome Benny Blum from Syndigo to the pod. Welcome, Benny.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you having me.
It's great to have you along for the ride today, and we were talking off air that you guys didn't really get too much time off for Easter, so it's not like you've got short weeks. So you were straight back into this week, and first up, podcast, right? And you were saying that hopefully the bar is set pretty low. I don't know how many podcasts you've been on before, but hopefully this is the best one you ever appear on.
Absolutely. I think it will be.
I'm looking forward to it. Now, you are the SVP of product over at Syndigo. Now, before we get into what Syndigo does, and the place you play in the commerce ecosystem, how the heck did you get into this space, man? What led you to be into this crazy world of commerce and data and MDM and syndication?
Yeah, started in ad tech and was in ad tech through the web 2.0 boom, late 2000 aughts timeframe, and eventually started my own organization with a couple other folks that was focused on data science as a service to the CMO. And that led to us being acquired by an organization that was in the e-commerce space, a company called SellPoints. Does what is called enhanced content by a lot of folks in this area, filling out rich interactive content on retail.com pages. And that eventually was acquired by Syndigo, which kind of brought me in. And as Syndigo has grown through a whole bunch of both organic and inorganic based growth, oversight of a series of different consolidation opportunities, incorporation of new technology into the Syndigo stack. And I've moved around and covered a few different roles within Syndigo as a result.
And really kind of owning within the brand. And as you say, grown through both organically and through M&A activity, and has acquired some pretty powerful, groundbreaking technologies over the years, probably most famously, and the one that probably my audience would know the most about is the acquisition of Riversand as a PIM MDM platform and integration of that platform into the core Syndigo product line. It's a lot when you're acquiring, I guess, a platform that's got a long and illustrious track record of being leaders in their category. Mm-hmm. It's trying to digest that is a big ask, and trying to harmonize tech stacks and harmonizing infrastructure, harmonizing product roadmaps and integrations and go-to-market and partner enablement. There's a lot to this game, isn't there? It's not, I think a lot of people get the idea that, once you're of a certain size and you can start acquiring competitors or complementary technologies, then life gets a whole hell of a lot easier for you. And in some respects, maybe that's true, but it's not just a walk in the park, is it?
No, not at all. There's so much to it. And it's right, like we always hear, people, process, technology that's associated with it. And you cannot discount any single one of those critical pillars of a successful integration. And having gone through a number of integrations over the years, I think Syndigo's facilitated upwards of 13, if not 15 different kind of integrations over the course of the history of the organization. We've seen a lot of different iterations of what it can be. And the reality is Riversand was a fantastic solution. And when we looked at it and said, gosh, we need to have this as a part of our larger portfolio, we realized you can't just bring that in and rip it apart and try to rebuild it. That's a terrible idea, because it's doing great. People love it, and it's a best of breed solution. So let's go ahead and figure out how it can fit in to enhance everything else and bring it together. And also honoring that PIM and MDM is a unique beast, and that it's purpose built to be fully custom to whomever it is that's choosing to acquire this piece of technology. You have your own data models, you have your own language, your own vocabulary that is unique to your organization. So you can't necessarily force that organization to adopt a different data model, a different way of storing information, a different process. You actually have to naturally integrate these two different pieces of technology that you have. And that's what Syndigo has been doing, where we have these two massive sides of the business, the Riversand PIM MDM solution, the sort of traditional Syndigo syndication solution, And if you think about it, they're opposites from a sense of that custom data model that PIM and MDM offers is the inverse of what syndication is, where you're trying to make your data conform to somebody else's standard. So it actually created a natural integration process of saying, oh, let's just automate the transformation of things. And now you can have these places that are intentionally different kind of operate in the same workflow for somebody.
And I think, to Syndigo's credit, what is a very difficult integration, as you rightly say, and by integration, we're not just talking integration into a customer's tech stack or a merchant's tech stack, but we're also talking into integration within the business structure of Syndigo, integration into the overall tech stack of data aggregation, syndication technology that was already existing within Syndigo. So making it a seamless piece of the stack, the Syndigo stack, but also a seamless piece of the customer stack, depending on which components of that stack they need. That's a big ask. But to Syndigo's credit, what I've witnessed, because I was a Riversand partner long before I was ever a Syndigo partner, and I only became a Syndigo partner because I had to when they acquired Riversand. But to their credit, Riversand, I think, would even admit themselves that although they were an amazing product company, that as a partner enablement business, they were an activation, partner enablement and activation business, they were just terrible. And I think as a professional and managed services business, they were terrible. And I think they would admit that. I think they'd be pretty transparent about that fact that, hey, we've always been great at product. We've always built a world-class, world-beating in many respects, really unique, best of breed PIM MDM solution, but the rest of our services maybe were not as good as the product was. And so maybe it did the product a little bit of a disservice because of the organization wrapped around it to deliver that product into the market. And to Syndigo's credit, I've seen them take quite a different approach to that. And so now I've actually got an account manager. For the very first time of working with Riversand, I actually now have an account manager that I have regular monthly meetings with, and we talk about what's happening in the market, and we talk about partner enablement. And you guys have started to work with ThoughtSpark, who I have been connected with them for many years before they even became ThoughtSpark, and they're becoming a critical piece of your infrastructure of delivering partner enablement to the world, really, around the platform. And even from a marketing perspective, I'm seeing that Syndigo is doing a pretty good job of getting the word out about this technology and being pretty vocal about the need for a really good PIM MDM solution. Even if you've got syndication nailed, if you don't have product information management and master data management nailed, syndication is going to be really difficult because you don't have a lot to syndicate, or at least it's not structured in a way that can be easily syndicated. Right. Kudos to Syndigo in that regard. But was that something when you guys, that you guys would have certainly, as part of due diligence, you would have gone in with eyes wide open? And did you guys say, hey, we see an opportunity here where everybody else maybe sees downside, we see upside because we think we can bring our partner org into this product, and we can integrate our partner organization, our partner design, our partner enablement, that we think we can seriously level up this product as part of a suite of products as opposed to a standalone piece of technology? Was that something you guys went, man, we can add some massive value here out of the gate as soon as we acquire this company?
I think it certainly takes time to realize the vision that you see when you walk in and you look at two different companies and think about what that marriage is going to be. And you have to strategize and figure out how are you going to go ahead and execute that. And commercially, you can start to make strides, maybe slightly faster than operationally, maybe slightly faster than technically. And to really make sure that you orchestrate that process of the integration in a way that makes the most sense. And that also means thinking through your investment strategies and figuring out what areas of the business you need to throw more horsepower behind in order to drive and create that overall best customer experience for interacting now with Syndigo, and whether that composable relationship that you have with Syndigo is, are you PIMing, right? Are you MDMing? Are you syndicating? What is the thing you're trying to do? Are you doing all of it? Amazing. We'd love you to do all of it. But we acknowledge that you might have a stack that includes pieces of our solution in one place and pieces somewhere else, and a partner or two or three that are supporting you regionally or globally in order to execute that process. So looking at that and understanding what it means to be in the business of PIM and MDM, the level of expectation, of integration, of support, of configuration, of setup, of management that you need to be able to do for any of those relationships, that's a lot of the exercise, right? And being able to act on that one over time has meant doubling down on our partnership ecosystem, understanding that you need to have these wonderful relationships with SIs. You need to really accept the way that your customers want to work and find ways to support them throughout. So yeah, like long story short is totally 100%. Like what you're saying has been our reality, and it has been each step along the way a really thoughtful set of decisions to make sure that we're supporting and orchestrating the convergence of organizations to be something that like truly can operate as a single unit.
And how did you guys come to the decision to rebrand and rename? Because initially it was Riversand by Syndigo, and they had their own website, and you just tacked on your name as part of the Riversand name. And at what point do you guys as a business decide, actually this legacy brand doesn't maybe fit anymore within our organizational structure, or it doesn't fit our go-to-market model, or it doesn't fit our positioning or our messaging or whatever? At what point do you decide? Because from my perspective, Riversand was such a well-known name in the PIM MDM space. It must have been a hard decision to finally say, okay, when are we going to actually put this name to rest? When are we going to put this brand to rest and make it full-blown Syndico? And we're going to come up with our own branding, our own naming conventions, our own messaging, our own positioning. We're going to go to market with this new stack that has some syndication components built into it, but it's modular, but it's combined together into a complete go-to-market offering. That must be a really hard decision, because even Oracle, who's probably one of the greatest tech acquisition companies in the history of tech, and they acquire people all the time, they don't always do it the same way. So for example, when they acquired NetSuite, it's NetSuite by Oracle, or it's Oracle NetSuite now. They haven't done away with the NetSuite name because the brand and the positioning was so famous. But yet there are other companies that they take over and it becomes just an Oracle product. So they're not always consistent in even the way they do things. And as I said, they're probably one of the greatest tech acquirers in the history of tech. And what goes through your mind when you're looking at digesting the business and trying to think, okay, does the brand have more value as a standalone brand, or does it have more value if it becomes effectively nested underneath that Syndigo parent and we go Syndigo strong to the market?
Yeah, I think you have to consider a couple pieces of the puzzle. If you're looking at the brand by itself, you do need to understand the investment that's gone into it, the market recognition, which there had been an enormous amount of investment in time and energy that went into kind of creating the recognition and acknowledgement that this is a market leading solution, a market leading company, and folks think about it that way. And honestly, they'll continue to think about that for a long time in the future. And so you have to be aware that from a pure SEO perspective, someone's going to get into Google and type Riversand, and what happens as a result of that. At the same time, you look at it the other side, can you get a benefit from the association of that investment from a larger brand that is Syndigo? So can you tuck something in and actually have that brand elevate everything to have this bigger association? So sure, you fight the good fight up front in saying, oh yes, it's one Syndigo, it's one process. That was the hypothesis, and the idea from the beginning was to make it one Syndigo. But can we capitalize on this high value brand that has been created and recognized amongst the analyst community for sure as a best of breed solution to be able to buoy the entire organization and take it to new heights? So I think that was a lot of the guidance that we and the ideation behind it was, how can we respect the process and not just flip the switch overnight, because you don't want to get rid of a great brand, but how can you methodically move through it so that eventually that great brand does naturally just become Syndigo, and Syndigo as a result is elevated as a larger organization.
And then obviously once you've done the brand piece and the messaging and the go-to-market piece, then you've got, how do you roadmap, as the head of product, this must also be a very difficult question. Do we have it remain as a standalone piece of technology that's maybe integrated with the rest of our stack purely via APIs, for example, and we have a deep API, native out-of-the-box API level integration to where effectively it's seamless. We move over their hosting infrastructure off of Azure or whatever it might be on over to our hosting infrastructure, or vice versa, to where they're harmonized. We've got one common set of API endpoints on a common domain, the Syndigo domain, et cetera, et cetera. Or do you then start thinking, okay, cool, can we take and maybe re-architect this platform on our core tech stack, taking all the knowledge, the capability, the UI components, the data structures, all that stuff, and can we move that over to our base tech stack? Because usually two tech stacks from two different companies, they're usually not identical. No matter how much you'd like them to be, they're not identical. So how do you start thinking about keeping it as a standalone technology that's more deeply integrated and feels more native as a module within the Syndigo stack, versus kind of re-platforming or refactoring that technology to be more Syndigo native? How do you think about that process and the cost and the time and the ROI on that kind of investment in the stack? Because obviously, if you refactor it and rebuild it on your native tech stack, then that makes ongoing development and enhancement a little bit easier because it goes through your standard CI/CD pipeline. So there's a lot to consider when you're thinking about product road mapping once you acquire, right? It's not as easy as, okay, we acquire it, we plug it in, and we're off to the races.
Yeah, and I think there's two sides to that as well. One is the business implication side and the expectations of your customer base versus the technological benefits. I think that we can pontificate and whiteboard out how theoretically awesome it would be for everything to be consolidated onto a single service or whatever it may be. But then there's totally different business expectations for an MDM, for example, in and around governance that are totally different than a syndication process, which you syndicate to put data in a public space. Like, the purpose of the product puts it on somebody else's publicly accessible website. So as a result, the governance requirements are super different from a master data management solution that is walled garden. This is my own area. It needs to be its own separate special place with different security access controls and all sorts of good stuff. So inherently, and I think this has worked to our advantage in some cases, because there are massive considerations in and around servicing an MDM solution or a PIM solution that require a set of configurations that are totally unique and isolated and partitioned for any given organization, that you don't necessarily need those things for other kinds of software where you can do multi-tenancy and all that good stuff. So allowing the requirements of the customers we're serving to also inform us around the technological decisions that we need to make has allowed us to understand, where do we just have to keep things consistent with how they've been versus where can we identify merging opportunities, where can we introduce meta layers for consolidated access, while also simplifying the experience for the customer, such that if they want to get data into, out of, across whatever solution they're using, that there is a common set of endpoints that are publicly available. When I say publicly, if you subscribe to the service, you can have access to a set of well-documented endpoints that they know how to get data into and out of. That's, to me, the customer wants it to ingress and egress from the system to be consistent and simple and reasonable and feasible. And then knowing that the data that is being stored there is being stored in a way that is adhering to their organizational requirements and to all the needs that happen as a result. So they're so different from a needs standpoint that you do have to look at these things and say, product by product, do I have an opportunity for an efficiency or theoretical efficiency due to a consolidation, or does it actually make sense to say data model A belongs here and data model B belongs there, and let's create a translation key between them? And I think we've had to look at each one of those stages along the way in order to understand where can we follow one path versus follow another in order to offer the best experience for our organization as well as our partner organizations.
And then if you do make any changes to those API endpoints, the connection domains, the connection IPs, the access and off layers, the permissions layers, et cetera, if you do change any of those fundamental structures, then obviously you have to telegraph to the market, both existing customers and new customers. You got to telegraph it enough in advance. You can't just make those changes overnight and then all of a sudden all these integrations in the market break. And also the apps that have been built on top of the core platform also would stop working because the app layer is going to be different and the API endpoints could be different. And you have to give enough notice. You got to give 6 months, 6 to 12 months notice to the market. Hey, we're making these significant changes to our API structures, the data sets, the calls. We're making changes to, for example, our webhooks layers and all the other things that we're doing that maybe you're relying on as part of your core data stack and integrations. We're telegraphing this to you enough in advance to where you can roadmap these changes into your own tech roadmap so that we don't get stuck with tech debt and legacy connections that need to be shut off.
Retrocompatibility is not an option, it's a requirement. In order to, in version controls are there, and sunsetting processes, and ensuring that very large roadmaps that we know these big time customers out there. If you have an enterprise customer and you say, oh yeah, to update an API to go from domain 1 to domain 2 or do this, like some of them are like, no, like I'm not going to do that. And a lot of people are like, okay, cool, but in 6 months, like we'll get to that. So whatever the ask is that you may have on it, you do need to make sure that there is a very prolonged sunset period in order to support it and be very thoughtful around the needs and the routes that you're asking folks to take.
And now that you are pretty well down the track of this acquisition, I think it was maybe two or 3 years ago now, you're well down the path now of getting that technology integrated into your stack. You've got a really clear go-to-market messaging now. You've got the branding wrapped around that now. You've kind of got the support services and enablement and all that sort of stuff, brown bag sessions. I got all that stuff up and running now. When we start thinking about the criticality, as I like to call it, the criticality, if you go back 10 years ago, PIM-MDM, even as a term, as part of the standard commerce stack, the standard go-to-market commerce stack of major players, it wasn't as well understood. It wasn't as well known. Like the big, huge enterprise brands, of course, and especially if they had very large, very complex catalogs, if they were an omni-channel business and they needed to get data out to multiple channels, including their own owned channels, it was reasonably well known. But I would say especially from the mid-market down, so let's say 50 million GMV and below brands, they didn't necessarily know what PIM-MDM was or how it could benefit them or why they needed it. But I think it's become part of the standard common commerce stack nomenclature now, and even brands that don't have a PIM-MDM solution, they're thinking about it. And they're going, when is the right time to maybe introduce this into the business? How do we do it? How do we manage the digital transformation around this? Because what I find is, especially when I'm consulting on PIM-MDM, that oftentimes it requires a completely different way to think about product data. And it requires the business to become a lot more consistent with their data definitions, their data structures, their understanding of the difference between structured and unstructured data and what that means to their business, the ability to roll up attributes from child products to parent and vice versa, the ability to concatenate and truncate in certain instances to populate and calculate a specific attribute. It just feels that businesses sometimes, they at a very high level, strategic level, they may understand the need and benefits of a PIM-MDM solution, but they don't necessarily understand how much effort it is going to take internally to adopt this technology, because it is not something that usually you can say, let's just drop this in and it's plug and play and we're ready to go. We do an integration with our ERP, we maybe do an integration with a PLM, and then we, on the syndication side, we pump this out to a few websites and a couple of marketplaces, and we're home and hosed and we're ready to go. And this is a 2-month project. It's typically not. I'm seeing most PIM-MDM projects run from 6 to 9 months, and a lot of that is data definition work internally. It's a lot of nomenclature work. It's bringing consistency to their attribute structures, the categorization structures. It usually requires them It's a fairly heavy lift is what I'm trying to say. But once they do that lift, then the
Yeah.
benefits are so long-term for them. And it's a gut check for a lot of businesses because there's a lot of messy data out there. And a lot of times these brands don't realize it until they go through a PIM project.
I agree with that. And you're right. There's massive upfront investment on an organization to clean house. When you go in, if you're going to subscribe to an MDM and you really are saying, I need to master these different domains of data within my organization, you are acknowledging that you have messy data up front. You're saying like, I'm operating in spreadsheets or something of the sort. And it's worked up until now, but I need a place that's the source of truth that I can govern, that can be maintained, and it will be somebody's job to actually maintain this. And before you get to that point, though, you do need to sweep out all the skeletons from the closet and figure out how do we clean things up. And it's a big project. Now, I think there is a benefit to a smaller organization making that investment because there has been less time to build up more and more skeletons in the closet. I actually think that it's the really big organizations that haven't done that effort that probably have many different systems that are sources of truths. That's the scary part, because which one's more valid? Is it their CRM that's more valid? Is it that spreadsheet that the person in finance or commercial ops is maintaining over here that's the source of truth? What's the
ERP,
place?
PLM,
Exactly, maybe so many different places that it could be. And I look at it on two different axes when I think about the challenge that we're undergoing. What's the complexity of the catalog that we're trying to deal with? Let's simplify our world for a second and just talk about products, because I think it's easier for people to rationalize product data versus some of the other domains that they might get into. So what's the complexity of the catalog? And who are the personas that you're actually trying to work on it? And when I say what's the goal of the different personas that you're trying to work on it. So I bucket two main personas. There's the data stewardship persona and there's the marketing personas. Your two major users of these types of data. And if you have a simple catalog where it's just like a handful of products and you're really only trying to do it from a marketing standpoint, it's actually a far simpler project. You're probably not actively looking at him, or you haven't been. And now that you're hearing terms like syndication be incorporated into the PIM conversation, you're saying, oh, I guess I'm now in the PIM. Like I'm now looking at a PIM because I'm supposed to get syndication out of a PIM. And as historically, those have been separate in a way. But now at least the analysts are very actively marketing syndication as a part of PIM. And we're saying, cool, great, we can do both for you. That sounds awesome. So on the complexity of the catalog, though, as you get into a more complicated catalog, now you've got like real PIM needs that are going on. How are you handling your assortment management? Where am I trying to sell a product? Do I sell the same products to all of my channel partners versus some of them? So now you're managing master product records versus SKU records that are being shipped out to different places. What's the relation? Do I have a ton of variations? There's so many different layers of complexity that can get baked in that can really take the need for a true product master or genuine product information management system that can be able to organize that in a way that makes sense to your system. And that's all just the upfront, making sure that you understand your data in your own context. I call that my data, my way, right? Like I need to figure out what is my data, my way before I can even start to think about my data your way, right? And what it's going to look like. And that ends up being where the marketing use case layers on, where they're taking all that hard work that's been done by the data stewardship team and the folks who are organizing and sustaining the source of truth, they're governing, they're maintaining all that good stuff. They're saying, cool, I'm going to take that and I'm going to put it in my regional context. I'm going to realize, do I need to curate this because I'm sending it to big box retailers that sort of need a different bit of information versus specialty retailers versus different regional retailers, marketplaces, whatever. There's so many different levels of optimization. And hey, you're probably sending it to Amazon. You probably need to specialize a whole bunch of those attributes to be optimized for that particular channel. That's the 800-pound gorilla. And you need to ensure that there's a team that's out there that's taking it that next level down and that next level down below to curate to that channel as that process of adopting and adjusting my data in my own context to my data in somebody else's context. And those are inherently two very different processes, right?
Yeah.
There is a logical start and stop. Now, each organization maybe has a different idea of how far they want to govern, right? And is source of truth at the regional level? Is it at the channel level? And that kind of dictates where the workflow kind of starts and stops. But you do have those personas. The smaller organizations like you were mentioning, oftentimes those two personas are one person.
Mhm.
And that makes that job more complicated. But as you get bigger and bigger, it becomes more and more people that are in there, and you're needing to provide purpose-built user experiences and user interfaces to facilitate each one of those different processes that someone's trying to do.
Hey team, I have a big favor to ask you. Please pause this episode and send the link of this episode to someone you know that you think would enjoy this content. Really appreciate you spreading the word. This is how we grow. We're not a Joe Rogan. We don't have big, massive advertising budgets, but we absolutely want to grow. We want to get the learnings from all of these episodes out to as wide of an audience as possible, and we need your help to do it. Thank you, and now back to your listening. And scale of the business doesn't always indicate accurately the complexity of the catalog data. So I was working with a client, and I was consulting their sub $50 million a year business. And they had over 400 product attributes at 3 different layers of the product. And they also had attribute values within those. So those were just the attributes, not the attribute values. So they had arrays within each of those 400 attributes. They had attribute arrays nested underneath those attributes. And so it was a footwear company. And so they didn't just have the standard size, color, style kind of thing. They had many other attributes that applied at each of those different layers. And those had to be published in a meaningful way, not only on their own website, but also making that data available and collateral around that available to their, so they had a direct to consumer product, but they also sold through distributors, and they also sold directly to chain retailers. So they had 3 different sort of slices or views of that data that they needed to put out into the market, depending on who the recipient of that data was and what they were going to be doing with it. And so now we have an ultra complex data model, like super complex. And then within each of those buyer personas of those products, we also had different channels, right? Digital channels, physical channels, et cetera, point of sale, et cetera. Now we're starting to get complex. And now we have to have the cross-sell relationships, the upsell relationships, the parent-child relationships, the product categorization relationships. We've got all sorts of product relationships there that have to be communicated in unique ways to the market with unique pieces of collateral in those channels and in those markets. So it can get complex very fast. So they were not a massive company, and it's not like they had tens of thousands of SKUs, but it's just their product data model by definition was really complex because their business model was complex more than anything else. And their channel proliferation was complex.
And in SKU proliferation as a result of channel proliferation, but apparel is a great example of a vertical that takes what seemingly should be one thing and turns it into 100 things really fast, right? Style, color, size is an exponential way to just explode the number of SKUs that you have out there. Even though you're just like, I don't know, I have 1 t-shirt, but now you have that t-shirt in 12 colors and 6 sizes. Like it gets big real fast. And I think that's where you start to look at the reason why PIMs exist is to provide tooling to be able to manage against your catalog in a really efficient way, whether that's SKU generation tools to help you create the N variants that you need of any given product in an effective way. It's attribute management through like taxonomies and hierarchies for inheritance. That's unbelievably convenient for you to say, oh, style, color, size, it's the same style all the way down. So all the style related attributes should be inherited. At the color level, it goes down, right? And so that way you're only actually managing the like incremental attributes at each lower level, as opposed to needing to rebuild the entire set of attribute
sets, yeah,
and copy it over, which on creation doesn't seem like that big of a deal because it's mostly copy paste and Excel spreadsheet uploads or something like that. But it's the management where in the ongoing maintenance where it becomes a problem where someone says, ooh, our new color palette says it's no longer fuchsia. And now we're calling that magenta. And we need you to update that. And it could be as simple as a language change, or it could be, a branded image
or a
change
market
that goes
specific
on.
or a market specific
Exactly.
language or localization effort or translation effort that is required within a specific market or in you guys terms context. And so
Yep.
that becomes a real big challenge. And I think that the other thing is that governance and version control is something that is oftentimes overlooked by the major PIM systems. And when I say governance, I'm talking workflow ownership at different points in the enrichment workflow. Every phase of the enrichment workflow of product data needs to be owned by someone, and someone needs to be responsible for that. Now, in the smaller orgs, as you say, someone might be responsible for all 5 steps in that workflow, but as you grow, maybe those 5 steps get apportioned out to 5 different people or 5 different roles with multiple people in that role. And so
And one person doing and one person approving. That's
yes,
actually, I think, a very common challenge that's related to workflow is how can we efficiently make it so the person who's doing has their work checked, and at what point in time does that person know to pop in and evaluate it and verify and moderate and ensure that it's ready to get passed on to the next one? Because the last thing you want is it to get too far before it needs to go back for correction to someone way upstream.
and that brings into the workflow the concept of stage gates, minimum enrichment levels by channel, by use case, by market, by translation, etc. So we have a lot of that going on. But then I also see that many brands are starting to and commonly using their PIM to build out complex product relationships that they don't want to or cannot build out in an ERP, for example, because an ERP isn't designed to do that. So I'm talking things like bundles. I'm talking things like kits. I'm talking things like product groupings. I'm talking things like cross sells, upsells, substitutions, successions, all those pieces of data around a product that a lot of brands, they will initially maybe only build out those product relationships in channel. Then they go, shit, this is not replicable, easily replicable now.
Right.
How am I going to do this across all my channels? Because I want to make this, let's say, for example, a virtual SKU. So let's say I want to create a unique bundle or a unique kit with a virtual SKU. That virtual SKU doesn't live unless it's got a BOM behind it, a bill of materials behind it in the ERP. That's probably not going to live in the ERP. It's probably only going to live in the PIM system and in the sales channels where you're pushing that out to. And because you can effectively build out the BOM in the PIM system so that you can push those virtual SKUs to market and you know what those are composed of. And these are the types of product relationships that brands oftentimes think about on a channel specific basis, but then how do we make that backwards compatible with all the other channels we sell through?
Well, the multi-domain component of the PIM and MDM being coupled together really is where I think that separates, because those relationships can also extend across domains, right? And we can get into the fact that you have a supplier or a vendor relationship, and there you have specific data and information about that supplier or vendor that you need to store in one place, but you need to be able to link it to what products which of your products that's actually directly impacting. And then if you want to talk about also things like location, where are you storing it? What warehouse is it in? So that how can you handle things like logistics and shipping and areas that someone needs to access in order to ensure, can I actually fulfill this request? And where's it coming from? And how do I need to think about routing it to the right location to even get it to the channel in the first place? So there's a lot of that. And I think that visual, being able to provide that both in visual form and tabular form, and supporting that in conjunction with your workflows and understanding and building up that composite set of products that ultimately does find its way out into that channel level relationship. But being able to do that in a more efficient and scalable way, as opposed to doing it at that low level, allows you to be able to apply that work that can be done at that higher level in a very efficient way out to many different products across many different channels.
And this, I think, becomes super interesting when we start thinking of marketplaces, when we start thinking of supplier access. So let's say you're a product distributor or you're a reseller and you've got 100 different suppliers that you're trying to aggregate data from. Sure, you could get them from via carrier pigeon, via CSV, via a ton of different formats. And then you've got to figure out a way to get that data into your PIM yourself in a consistent way. But with modern PIM systems like Syndigo PIM, we now can create a supplier portal where they can manage their data. It still goes through our workflows. It still goes through our minimum attribution requirements. It still goes through our approval workflows, our syndication workflows, our version control. It still goes through all that process. But maybe instead of us initiating the process, it's the supplier initiating the process with a base set of product data and creating a portal where they can actually log in and they can do their CSV data uploads to kick off those enrichment workflows and approval workflows within our business. This is now where we can start bringing some serious efficiency to the game, but you have to have a PIM MDM solution that has that concept built in of external access. Otherwise, you're in deep trouble. You can't facilitate it. You then have to collect it. Maybe you've got an SFTP server where all your suppliers have their own folders on that server and they dump all their product information. And then you got to have a team internally that grabs that in whatever format and then tries to standardize it and upload.
And I think the standardize word is the most critical word that you said there, because it's one thing to actually get people to give you data. It's another thing for it to be in a format that you're ready to use. And I think the most valuable piece of that vendor portal offering is the idea of requirements and readiness. So when I talked about my data, my way to my data, your way, it's actually now we're flipping it on its head and saying, let me impose the requirements of what I need from you. I'll tell you the minimum required stuff to be ready to send me data, but I'll also tell you what's good, right?
Yeah.
So not only,
look?
let me tell you what good looks like. Let me tell you, okay, I need these 10 things to like actually get you off the ground, but I need these 40 things for it to be like really great. And if you want it to be findable in my space, if you want me to be able to enrich it with more gusto and really make this product look good in my ecosystem, that's when it gets really valuable, is to be able to couple together this notion of readiness with data quality. And as a result, you know that when data comes through that pipeline into your workflows within PIM, the data meets a certain standard, it's ready to go, it's going to be flow so much faster through my internal workflows on my side. And ultimately, you, vendor XYZ, get what you want, which is your product gets listed that much faster, right? Or your information, your update, your whatever it is, flows through my system that much faster because it already met my standard, because I gave you checks when you uploaded it in the first place.
And what a lot of those suppliers don't know, if they're just a wholesaler or they're just a manufacturer, they don't necessarily understand the impact on the sellability of their product is so reliant on good product data and good structured product data. They don't necessarily realize that, okay, on my website, I've got this amazing search merchant personalization technology, but it really only performs super well in the presence of really good structured data. It doesn't necessarily work well if the only thing I've got about your product is a paragraph description of your product that's unstructured. Sometimes they can create word clouds and syntax linkages and things like that. But those platforms, those search merchandising and personalization platforms, they always perform significantly better in the presence of good breadth and depth of structured product data and attribution, and even driving things like facets and filters. Without structured product data, you can't apply facets and meaningful facets and filters within your taxonomy, right? And therefore, you can't translate that into something meaningful on a front-end digital experience for your customers either, to where when they drop into a category that's got 1,000 products with no facets and filters, how the hell are they going to filter that down to the 5 that actually meet their needs? And so being able to communicate that in a meaningful way to suppliers and saying, we're not being dicks about this just to be dicks. We're creating this product data structure to actually help you sell more stuff and to help you sell your stuff more efficiently through the channels that we're owning and that we're putting out into the world. And so I think there has to be a really solid discussion with certain suppliers, especially smaller mom and pop type suppliers. We implemented at a brand that I was working inside previously. We were trying to onboard 30,000 enriched product data sets from 200 plus suppliers. And some of those suppliers were small mom and pop suppliers. And sometimes they didn't even have the data themselves. They had to go and get the product data. They had to go and source the product data from their contract manufacturers, for example, or whatever it might be. They didn't even have, even if they wanted to give us the data, they sometimes didn't even have to begin with. So by giving them a consistent data structure, now instead of saying, go get us good product data, we say, no, these are the attributes we need to know about your product category so that when we present it on the front end, we're presenting in a consistent way to the consumer. And so giving them a structure, because sometimes they need a structure, they don't have one themselves. So sometimes giving a supplier a structure, they're like, thank God we have somebody that knows these product categories inside and out and can actually bring structure to our own product data. And sometimes what they find is going through that exercise of collecting and collating the data for you. Now, all of a sudden, now all of their customers benefit from that, not just you as that one-off customer. Now you forced data governance on them as a supplier, which sometimes they need.
I agree. And I think that coming from again, looking at small versus big for a second, in the problem statement you're giving where the supplier's smaller shop maybe doesn't have the data, they are going to benefit from the organization that you're placing on their data coming in. On the flip side, if someone doesn't give you those facets and those attributes that you're looking for, they are not only leaning on you to maybe figure out how it should be findable, searchable, discoverable within your world, but they're also saying like, all right, good luck parsing out that data. Maybe you'll find it. Maybe it's just going to get listed and no one's ever going to get to that place. Here, where you're enabling the supplier ultimately to own how their product is perceived and classified and categorized and represented within your ecosystem is really powerful. And I would think that the larger organizations that do have that knowledge to at least have the opportunity to own the presentation of their product and the findability, the usability, the discoverability of their product record within your system goes a really long way. So it appeals to suppliers of all sizes that are going in there because you're ultimately either putting structure on poorly structured process or you are enabling and rewarding well-structured process with a place to show it and capitalize on your market.
And on the flip side, what I've found is that when suppliers consistently refuse or cannot come to the table with good product data, but the reseller, the wholesaler, the distributor, the retailer, whatever it is, if they've got a PIM system and they've got a really good merchandising team and a really good marketing team, sometimes that is the unique value add. So they'll work with the supplier and they'll try to get as much product data as they can, but they'll usually have an expiry time. They'll say, okay, we'll give you 3 months or 6 months or whatever to get this data to us, but we really want to sell the product. And so if we hit these deadlines and we just can't get the data out of you for whatever reason, then that goes into a workflow that goes to our merchandising team. And then we'll maybe do the product photography. We'll maybe scan a PDF. We'll copy and paste out of a PDF into our system, or we'll generate the content. We'll look at the ingredients. We'll do whatever as we need to do, or we'll go to your website. We'll scrape stuff off your website. We'll do something to enrich that product data set in our format and in our data model that we need to be able to sell the product. Now, all of a sudden, that data asset is an asset that's unique to us. And that starts to build a moat around other competitors that are reselling that product, that same product into the market, that don't have that internal resource to be able to enrich their products in a structured, meaningful way. Now, they don't have that data as an asset. So I'm seeing a flip side of that, and I'm trying to help brands understand that just because you can't get this data out of your suppliers isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it can be a good thing if you can add unique value to that product data set that you uniquely own. Now it's an asset that allows you to market and merchandise that product better than anyone else and be indexed by Google better than anyone else, which means you're going to become the go-to person for this product because you're the only person that turns up when people are searching for these products and buy those attributes. And so I think it really comes down to how can we help business leaders understand and put a value on product data, and will they allocate the appropriate level of resources around this to build and maintain this asset over time. And instead of seeing it as a cost center, they're now seeing it, okay, this is a value center. This is a value center for our business. This is an asset just the same way as a truck that could do deliveries for us would be an asset. We have to view it in that same light, and then we will allocate the appropriate resources to it.
I think that this is an area where historically it's been an intimidating large amount of energy, effort, time, ultimately money that needs to get invested in order to facilitate that end-to-end process that you just articulated is an area where generative AI has actually introduced itself as a pathway to cut some pretty significant corners for previously prohibitively expensive stages. Having an entire custom dev shop or having photography studio and hiring 3 people to input data is expensive, and it's time consuming to set up, and it's a process. But all of a sudden being able to get 80-90% of the way there through a handful of prompts, and then allow a relatively junior person who understands your brand guidelines to be able to fill in the blanks and fill it out. That's where I think there's a huge value prop, and we're starting to see folks talk about efficiency gains. And they're not talking about 90% efficiency gains. They're talking about 10 to 15% efficiency gains, but that's actually enough to cut a few corners and save a few bucks. I think an area, and we're hearing about it more and more, we're seeing it. I know we're actively working on our side where PIM solutions, MDM solutions, syndication solutions are seeking to help to fill in the gaps of you give me an incomplete record, I help you provide recommendations for how to complete that record. And I think there are dozens of derivatives of that statement that are showing up amongst our solutions, amongst competitive solutions, and it's unquestionably the space of huge focus for a lot of different organizations right now. And it absolutely represents what will happen in the next 1 to 2 years of this space.
Now let's pivot for a second and talk a little bit about the difference between PIM in a B2C, D2C environment versus a B2B environment, because oftentimes they're very different, but equally critical, equally crucial, equally important. I would argue that sometimes in a B2B environment, it's even more crucial because typically those products are not as easily driven, at least from a product data perspective, by things like Gen AI as in the B2C, D2C world. Obviously, if we're talking a blue polka dot dress, then something like Ocular can oftentimes provide the structured data set around that through machine vision and machine learning. Now we can auto-populate some of those attributes. It's a mid-length blue polka dot dress, for example. We now have technology out there from a Gen AI perspective that works pretty well in most consumer products because they're well-known product types, right? A coffee mug is a coffee mug, and okay, it's got this design, it's got this color, holds this much quantity, etc. But in the B2B world, we have typically much more complex, oftentimes industrial type products, etc., where 2 products may look, for all intents and purposes, identical, a pump, but it's got a different inlet size, a different outlet size, a different flow rate, a different head level that it can handle, etc. And so I think that B2B has been slow on the digital uptake, full stop. Like from an e-commerce perspective, from even an EDI perspective, etc., they've been very slow on the digital uptake. But I'm seeing more B2B brands than ever before realize the value of well-attributed products and a really well-articulated and structured workflow to gather those attributes and that product information in a meaningful way. So when we look at Syndigo, roughly what percentage, when we think of just Syndigo PIM now, what would you estimate your split is between B2C, D2C merchants versus B2B merchants? And how are you seeing that change over time, that split change over time?
Sure. Probably more like 60-40. I think that something like industrial manufacturing is a huge vertical for us. We see there is a massive value add that's being provided, and we see a number of different folks that are working with us to help to make sense out of these nuanced products that, yes, you and I probably are never going to buy. I'm not going to go into a store and buy a different fitting for a pump that goes in the sewer system out in front of my house. But at the same time, they're extraordinarily complex assortments and these crazy catalogs that are being built out, and they require massive scale and efficiency in order to work with them. When we talked earlier about the 2 different axes of catalog complexity and different personas, when you get into that kind of a market, it's like off the charts in catalog complexity. And as a result,
and size.
And sizing for sure. They need the tools that come with enterprise PIM and enterprise DAM, probably equally, if not more, than a lot of these like theoretically simpler catalogs that we think about when we're talking about a B2C type of product offering. So there's a very significant play when it comes to the B2B offerings. It's just more, I don't know, technically accessible to talk about the retail focused use cases that are there. And so they end up being a lot of the examples that we talk about when we come through, because you and I can rationalize what it means to talk about style, color, size, and apparel for shoes, because I buy shoes and I know what that's like, and I don't buy water pumps.
Yeah, and so you're saying that as of today, roughly say 60% is retail merchants and
There's a
40% might be
huge, yeah,
B2B merchants?
it's about that ballpark. And it evolves. I think that any given kind of quarter we see like different trends that are coming up, but certainly in terms of that distribution, we see like a pretty significant amount of use cases around B2C versus B2B. And so yes, it'd be about that distribution today.
And are you seeing B2B adoption accelerate? Because I am, and I'm really close to the B2B space because that's my primary focus of my consulting. I've definitely seen over the last, and particularly through COVID, just digital adoption full stop in the B2B sector has accelerated massively. So have you seen an acceleration in both adoption and understanding from the B2B world around the value and necessity of PIM, DAM, MDM syndication solutions? Has that
Absolutely.
become more on their radar over the last, say, 5 years versus before that?
Absolutely. I think that the retail use case has long been understood and been known and been addressed as, yep, okay, we get it, that we need those solutions. And because of the B2B holdout on that, and now it's a massive set of industries. It's not like
Yeah.
it's one industry that
Yeah.
encompasses all of B2B.
It's 100 categories of products.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I just talked about one in terms of industrial manufacturing, but there's dozens and dozens that are applied. So the fact that you have these huge businesses and business sectors that have made the commitment and the readiness to make the jump into the digitization process, and the idea of a digital SKU versus physical SKU is a meaningful challenge for their organization to adopt. Now we're able to see this huge amount of momentum come in that space. And so for sure, growing momentum in and around that area, more and more awareness, and the number of different verticals that we're having to look at and understand and make decisions around where is that ideal customer fit, where do we need to have standardized data models to be able to support things, where do we need to establish more subject matter expertise to be able to support the type of inbound, what type of relationships do we establish with different SIs and partners within our community to ensure we have coverage of the right verticals as folks want to work and engage with us on their solutions.
And the integrations too, I think, must play a big part in that, because in the B2B world, you've got a different set of standard ERPs that are used in the heavy duty B2B world, and in the B2C, D2C world, there's a different set. There is some overlap, but oftentimes, particularly in the manufacturing or light manufacturing sector, they're using a different suite of ERPs than you would use in the typical retail sector, for example. And so I'm guessing that you now all of a sudden have to start thinking about, okay, what are the critical out of the box integrations we need to have in the B2B world versus the B2C world? And they, again, there's some overlap, but there's oftentimes quite significant distinctions there.
Yeah. And what solution do you want to take on? Do you want to generalize SDK opportunities for folks to go build their own? Or do you want to standardize with the MuleSoft and Workatos and the SnapLogics of the world to make it easier for folks to just hook in with something that maybe they already subscribe to? Or do you want to create kind of your own little cartridge that's like a custom integration with a specific service? And I think more often than not, what we end up doing is we listen to our partners who are doing this at scale with a lot of volume, and they're saying, hey, we have a really big need for this specific integration. In fact, we've prototyped it here. Is this something that we can collaborate with you to adopt to make standard? Or is this something that needs to remain to be like a custom bespoke kind of implementation through the
A
SDK
middleware tool, for example, or a middleware tool that you have, because obviously if you build out an integration with a middleware tool, then any other endpoint that it already is connected to, then all of a sudden you open up access to all those endpoints by the PIM. So there's pros and cons to both direct out of the box integrations to specific endpoints versus middleware mediated, bypass mediated endpoints. There's pros and cons to each approach.
Yeah. You find the biggest ones that the most folks have a need for, and you own those. And then
Totally.
for basically everything, everything else, you find the most practical next best solution. A lot of that ends up being iPaaS. Some of that ends up being partner managed process and kind of everything in between. But I wish I could say there was a one size fits all on that one.
There
You've got
isn't.
to look at each one. You've got to listen to your customers. You've got to understand where's the main need. And if you have a common need, you develop for it and you support it. And until then, you allow your partners to inform you through prototyping, betas, alphas, and all that good stuff.
Love it. And what's on your radar if we look out over the next 12, 18 months? Is there anything your customer base is asking for that maybe you don't do yet or don't do it in exactly the way they want? Or is there something out there that you go, hey, here's a massive opportunity. We don't do this thing yet, but we know it's an emerging opportunity that we'd love to own. What's high on your priority list in terms of product roadmap over the next 12, 18 months?
Yeah. Thinking about it in a couple different contexts, I would say that evolving our party-based MDM service to be more applicable down at the customer level. So we see our party-based MDM service to be something that is primarily used at the vendor or at the supplier level. And we recognize there's a massive opportunity, and folks are asking us to be able to support customer level, individual level party MDM. And so exploring that to consider expanding through and looking at that opportunity to fulfill the requests that our customers are asking us to do, as they're already doing multi-domain in our space. So let's really tie a bow on the complete set of MDM services by expanding to that space. And then the other major focus area is just continuing to think about the PXM offering as you get into PIM and thinking through how can we make this holistic offering of PIM, syndication, digital shelf analytics, all of the above coming together in such a way that you're able to go through that process of management, maintenance, governance, curation, distribution, optimization, analysis, insight, can really flow all the way through and create that infinity loop in a way that is sustainable and ongoing, and makes it just frankly easy for our customers to do that. And in the third major bucket that kind of goes across both of those is just ongoing automation. I mentioned different Gen AI services and ensuring that we're logically injecting the appropriate recommendation and generation services that can go in, that can learn, that can improve, to find those friction points of that process and those workflows and just make them easier, right? Like, where can we provide better recommendations? Where can we provide better automations? That's really where our head is. That's what our customers are telling us they need, and we're going to keep digging into it.
Yeah, and I guess sometimes those AI services like DataX and some of the other third-party services, sometimes it means creating an integration with some of those third-party services, and sometimes Absolutely. It means providing those services natively inside the platform, or a combination of the two, or giving merchants options. I think makes a lot of sense. Maybe it's integrating with Ocular. Maybe it's there's a number of different third-party tools out there from an automated enrichment perspective that have been doing this for a very long time. So where you don't need to reinvent the wheel, maybe it makes sense to just integrate with a third-party service that's already been doing it and very well known.
Exactly. We're not saying we have to build everything in-house. We are fully aware there are some amazing companies that have some amazing services that really just need to be made available within the workflows that you're already executing in PIM, MDM, syndication. And all we have to do is say, yep, you can now do that here with this data, and it's super easy, low code, no code to execute, versus other areas where we do have some proprietary value in data and offering, and we maybe should either take in a model and train it on our data to make it more valuable, or actually build the model ourselves. So we're looking at every iteration thereof, and we do have a team that's fully focused right now on prioritizing those use cases, understanding the different problem statements, finding the right set of libraries, services, potential partners to bring together so that those can be rolled out in very strategic and thoughtful ways throughout those workflows.
Makes sense. Absolutely love it. Now, as we come down to the end of our time together, it's been fantastic chatting with you. An hour has absolutely flown by. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Now, this is where I get to turn the microphone over to you. I get to flip the script. I get to let you ask me one question. Any question you like, can be personal or professional. So, Benny Blum from Syndigo, what is your question for me today?
Where are you right now taking this interview? What part of the world are you in, and how far away are you from each other?
I am currently in Puebla, Mexico. So I'm originally California born and raised, moved to New Zealand in my early 20s, spent almost 30 years there. We moved to Mexico just over a year ago. We traveled around the country for all of 2023. We did about 20,000 kilometers traveling around to see where we wanted to live. And we liked Puebla the most as a place to make a life. And so we've been building a base of operations here in Puebla for a couple of months now, and we're absolutely loving it. So it's about 2 hours southeast of Mexico City on the great central plateau in the middle of Mexico. We sit at about 2,000 meters of elevation here, similar to Mexico City. So it's a beautiful place. Weather is very much like San Diego. It's pretty much warm and temperate year round. Doesn't get a lot of rain here. Pretty much the only, I guess, from a weather or from a, I guess, an environmental perspective, we live very close to an active volcano called Popo here in Puebla, and so oftentimes it's smoking and it's belching smoke, and depending on which way the wind is blowing, it can be pretty smoky and get ash on our cars here. Recently bought a whole home air purifier to keep the nasties out of the home. So that's where we're living, and we absolutely love it so far.
I'm over here in California, and I know a thing about the whole home air purifier is we have our fire seasons have been epic for the past couple years, and certainly need to get everyone in and have the air purifier flowing so my kiddos don't have those coughs that come up as a result.
Totally. Benny, this has been a fantastic conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I wish you every success over at Syndigo, and I can't wait to see what you guys are going to do over the next 12 to 18 months in the PIM MDM and data distribution space. It's going to be a fun one to watch and be a part of, and I can't wait to speak to you again soon.
Thanks so much, Jason. The pleasure's been mine. Cheers.
Are you a B2B or D2C e-commerce merchant? Then head over to greenwoodconsulting.net to learn how we can help you scale your business.